In a stunning turn of events, cities across the United States have erupted in chaos following what is now being called one of the largest mass deportation operations in modern American history. The Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, better known as ICE, confirmed that over 3,000 undocumented migrants were apprehended and deported in a coordinated sweep conducted over 72 hours. But the aftermath? Protests, riots, and a deeply divided public asking one simple question: what really happened? In a nation navigating unprecedented demographic shifts, labor volatility and rising border tensions, the Trump administration's recent mandate for 3,000 ICE arrests per day marks a dramatic and strategic pivot in immigration enforcement. Critics are quick to frame this escalation as draconian, but a closer analysis, grounded in verified developments, reveals a far more nuanced rationale that speaks to long-term structural resilience, national legal integrity, and economic recalibration. Historically, ICE prioritized criminal aliens with active convictions or dangerous affiliations. Under that framework, the average daily arrest rate hovered around 650 individuals. The new quota of 3,000 arrests per day, a nearly five-fold increase, signals a conscious shift from a narrow enforcement lens to a broader legal enforcement mechanism, one that includes visa overstayers, asylum violators, and other undocumented entrants without felony records. This shift has drawn criticism for contradicting ICE's foundational mandate. But in truth, the expansion reflects contemporary national realities, where the volume of non-criminal immigration violations has overwhelmed administrative courts, border facilities, and municipal infrastructures. The administration's logic is simple: the rule of law must be upheld universally, not selectively. One of the most controversial expansions has been ICE's operations at non-traditional sites: farms, hotels, restaurants, and retail centers. These sectors were previously exempted from broad raids due to their essential roles during the COVID-19 recovery phase. With that exemption lifted, the crackdown has triggered significant tension with business owners, particularly in agriculture and hospitality, where labor shortages and undocumented employment often intersect. But this tension uncovers a deeper challenge. Parts of the United States economy have become structurally reliant on labor that exists in legal ambiguity. The ICE expansion, then, isn't simply about deportation. It's a push to force industries to restructure hiring practices and move toward more compliant, accountable employment models. Major cities, Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, San Francisco, have emerged as flashpoints. These urban centers are hubs for immigrant populations and consequently, ground zero for both ICE operations and economic disruption. In Los Angeles, market vendors report revenue drops from $2,000 to $300 per day due to foot traffic reduction after raids. In the Bay Area, ICE reportedly detained individuals with no criminal records, including asylum seekers with pending cases. While these instances fuel humanitarian concerns, they also highlight the tension between federal immigration law and local sanctuary policies, a jurisdictional clash that has long challenged cohesive governance. The escalation from peaceful protest to widespread civil unrest is not unfamiliar territory in American history, but the scale and intensity of what unfolded during this wave of ICE enforcement stunned even seasoned observers. It began with impassioned crowds gathering outside ICE field offices in Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, and Oakland. Many were immigrant advocates, local residents, and civil rights organizers. At first, the demonstrations were focused: calls for transparency in detentions, legal protections for asylum seekers, and opposition to what some perceived as indiscriminate raids. But as daily arrests surged toward the 3,000 target, the tenor on the streets shifted. In Los Angeles, tensions erupted within hours of ICE units executing workplace raids on a string of restaurants and grocery stores in the South Bay area. Word of multiple undocumented individuals, some with children, some reportedly with pending legal cases, being detained triggered an outpouring of fury. Crowds surged, chants turned into blockades, signs into projectiles, ICE buses were surrounded by demonstrators who lay in the streets, refusing to let them pass. Within minutes, social media broadcasts were live streaming the chaos to millions. By late evening, the protests had transformed. Peaceful chants gave way to aggressive confrontations. Fireworks were set off near ICE fencing. Officers were pelted with bottles and smoke bombs. Several demonstrators tried to breach federal buildings. In response, LAPD and DHS tactical teams deployed non-lethal crowd control measures: tear gas, pepper spray, rubber bullets, and flashbangs, in an attempt to disperse the increasingly volatile gatherings. It wasn't enough. When the riots spilled into nearby business districts, resulting in looting and property damage, President Trump invoked emergency powers. In a nationally televised address, he announced the immediate deployment of National Guard units and U.S. Marines to support ICE and federal installations in California, Illinois, and New York. This move was constitutionally permitted under the Insurrection Act, but politically explosive. California Governor Gavin Newsom and Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass both criticized the deployment as an authoritarian overreach, while federal officials defended it as a necessary response to maintain legal order and protect government personnel. Legal experts remained divided. While some argued the federal government had every right to protect its operations and agents, others warned that unilateral military action on domestic soil risked inflaming the situation further. Nevertheless, once deployed, the federal presence dramatically altered the landscape. Armed personnel formed perimeters around ICE facilities, air patrols monitored protest hotspots, and a temporary dusk curfew was imposed in at least 6 major cities. Clashes continued sporadically for several days, but by week's end, order had largely been restored, at the cost of over 600 civilian arrests, dozens of officer injuries, and widespread public debate. But beyond the confrontations on asphalt and courthouse steps lies a deeper truth. The United States government, in this moment, was not merely responding to unrest, it was being forced to reconcile the moral, political, and institutional contradictions at the heart of immigration policy itself. President Trump's supporters praised the swift response as evidence of law and order leadership, arguing that the safety of agents and the sanctity of law enforcement must never be compromised by public opinion, however passionate. If we don't protect those enforcing the law, one former Department of Homeland Security official stated, we erode the very concept of justice. Conversely, civil rights groups warned of a slippery slope, where militarized responses to domestic dissent could become normalized, and where the line between legal protest and riot may be subjectively drawn. Yet within this tension lies America's most resilient feature, its ability to hold both pressure and dialogue in the same space. The fact that protesters could challenge federal policy, that mayors could publicly oppose presidential orders, and that courts could hear emergency motions against executive actions, all while law enforcement maintained operational integrity, is not dysfunction, but democracy in motion. The use of federal force during these riots may be controversial, but it also highlighted the balancing act every constitutional republic must perform, securing civil liberties while preserving public order. Protecting the right to assemble, even in protest of the government itself, is a cornerstone of American identity. But so is the principle that laws must be enforced evenly and fairly, especially when it comes to national sovereignty. In essence, the riots weren't just a response to ICE, they were a reflection of a nation wrestling with competing visions of justice, freedom, and responsibility. Public opinion is almost evenly split. Around 53% of Americans support increased ICE operations, citing national security, economic control, and border integrity. Meanwhile, 47% believe the scale of operations is excessive, citing humanitarian concerns and civil liberty concerns. Rather than a sign of dysfunction, this divide reveals something essential about the U.S. system. It accommodates dissent, debate, and pluralism. The immigration debate is not a war, It's a democratic exercise in finding the balance between compassion and control. This moment in U.S. immigration history is not just about numbers or quotas, it's about the battle for administrative clarity, the reassertion of national law, and the pressure to resolve contradictions between federal policy and local realities. It's messy, it's contested, but it is undeniably governance in action, and the world is watching how America responds.